Cide. I just want to say a few words to welcome Professor George Frederickson to Cide and to thank him for sharing with us this time to talk about social equity. For all of us who study public administration and for all of us who have read his work and who have tried to emulate not only the methodological approach and the academic rigor, but also the profound commitment to social equity, to a new understanding of public administration, of what public service means. It's really a great honor to have Professor Frederickson here with us today. Many of us have read his books and used his books as in our sessions. Many of our students have to endure our long dissertations on what we think George Frederickson is right in his books, and I'm not sure we have been very good at that, but fortunately now we have Professor Frederickson here to put things right. So Professor, thank you for being here with us. On behalf of Cide, I want to thank you and to invite you to come here often. It would be great to have this as your first one of a long list of visits and interactions that we, as individual professors and associates, have with you. It would be great for us to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you, Guillermo, for the presentation. I appreciate that. Well, I don't think George Frederickson is a professor who needs any kind of presentation. If we want to know about the field, probably said that he's the field of administration. He's one of the most important scholars in since the last half of the last century until now. As Guillermo was saying, we have read his work a lot, and we all the time try to interpret what he said, and we make interpretations, and I teach my students, this is what Frederickson said, and maybe it's not what he was intended. So that's my point of view. He's a passionate advocate of public service. I think we need to learn a lot from the Mexican perspective about what it means to be a public servant, and what should it mean, and how we can, from the academic perspective, contribute to make better public service in general. I think that the only introduction that George will need is that so that perhaps the most important in terms of academics, the most important organization today is the Public Management Research Association Conference, the Public Management Research Association, and it gives a award to a lifelong career contributing to the field. The name of that award is the George Frederickson Award. So that I don't think I can say anything else to introduce George Frederickson. And with that, I leave you and I say thank you very much, George. I was telling you, since I read the first time your work coming out of the Middleburg conference, I was just thrilled with the field, and I said, this is the field in which I want to study and I want to contribute. So thank you very much for coming at Cide.
Well, you're welcome. Can you hear me all right? I'm just thrilled to be here, and I find your campus beautiful, and the view from the window is astonishing. Looks like Mexico City is very rich. it's very nice to see Professor Ramirez again. I first met him when he was a graduate student. We think of him as the Antonio Banderas of public administration. He wins the prize for the best looking professor of public administration. It makes the rest of us very jealous and very angry. All of the beautiful students follow him. Anyway, now he. Yes. I like your color now. Anyway, in the interest of moving along, I'm going to have to speak very quickly, but I'm going to try to speak as clearly as I can, in the hope that if your English is better than my Spanish, then we can work things out. My subject today is social equity, and the title I have chosen is Thick Social Equity compared to Thin Social Equity. And I will try to explain that, what I mean by that. Now let's see if this works. Can you read it? Okay.
They have screens.
Yes. Okay. Social equity grew out of social and political turbulence in the United States in the 1960s. You're experiencing a little social turbulence in Mexico right now. But it was prolonged, it had gone on for several years, and it was very dangerous. Fires and closing campuses down and some deaths, some students were killed. It was a very serious problem. So we had a special meeting of people specializing in public administration. Excellent, thank you. Especially people who were interested in the topic. We met to discuss these social problems. And we thought that the field of public administration has very little to say about problems of human well-being, about problems of equality, about problems of fairness, or problems of justice. That our field didn't say much about that, and could we make a contribution to the subject of public administration by rethinking the origins of the field? So that was what we were dealing with. The phrase social equity grew out of that discussion. The first thing we did was we rejected the policy administration dichotomy. That is the claim that politics is one thing and administration is another thing, and that they are very separate. We said no, they're almost the same thing. There's one kind of politics. The election is that kind of politics. Political parties, protest in the street, that's a certain kind of politics. But administration is the politics of experts, the politics of specialists, the politics of bureaucrats. It's still, what we're saying is, it is still a part of government, it is still normative, it still favors some and not others. It has to do with distribution. So we rejected the dichotomy. We also rejected the argument that in the field of public administration that we were neutral, that we were objective. We said everybody has a point of view, everybody has an opinion, and that is good. That we don't want a public official. I don't want someone to head an important agency of government who's not passionate about that subject. I do not want him or her to be objective. I want him or her to be biased. So you want the leader of the university to be a passionate advocate for the university, not objective or neutral at all. So we rejected the idea of neutrality. We thought we would add to the original objectives of the field, which were effectiveness and efficiency, the word equity. And we thought that would be the third so-called pillar public administration. Now, at the time, we knew that what we were talking about was primarily normative. It was a moral claim. It was theoretical and abstract. It was not empirical. We had very little evidence. We had a set of claims and a philosophical and theoretical argument. And we presented our argument in the 60s and early 70s in the literature of the field. Well, we hoped then that everyone would say, ah, that is good. They are right. We received much opposition. My name was very unpopular. And in fact, the whole book was written just about me. Somebody didn't agree with me, so they wrote a whole book about that. Pretty good book, actually. So if you look at the 70s and 80s, the years that came after the emergence of social equity, it turns out that social equity was not very influential in public administration. What was influential in the 70s and 80s and into the 90s was economic theory and the theory of the market and the theory of principles and agents, the theory of common resources, Ostrom and others. Those were the dominant theories, and social equity, we thought by maybe 1990 that we had been failures, that we had not been successful. Then things began to change. This is supposed to be a cartoon, but my understanding is that cartoons do not work in different languages and cultures. But this makes reference to a place in the Bible. Maybe you know about the place, the rich man. You understand that? Okay, that's, never mind. In the past 15 or 20 years, there has been a gradual but very significant shift in perspectives on public administration. And now that we come to 2013, we can look back on the last 15 or 20 years and conclude that we have moved from thin social equity, which is the theory of social equity that is only normative and philosophical, to thick social equity, which is empirically based and has lots of application and a lot of evidence to support it. So, and now the literature on social equity and the social equity perspective in public administration is everywhere. People talk about it, people understand it, and it is as popular now as it was unpopular in the 70s and 80s. Let me try to take the rest of my time today to explain what I mean by thick social equity. There's another joke, I'm going to go past that. You understand what that? Okay. People don't want to pay taxes, but then they complain because the streets are very bad. The first perspective in thick social equity is a thing we call discovering inequality. In my country, we refer to it as the 1% problem. Actually, it can be described as the 5% problem or the 10% problem. It's the same problem, and that is that most of the growth in the economy and most of the growth in personal wealth in my country in the last 10 or 15 years has been concentrated at the top. 10%, 5%, 1%. I will not argue with you about what percentages, but we know that a small percentage are doing extremely well, and the rest are doing considerably less well. I don't know whether that's true in Mexico. It's a similar problem. the distance between the rich and everyone else is much greater. So we are discovering inequality. And the gap between those who have and those who do not have is a wider gap. Poverty is worse. We also know and understand, and this is a particular sensitivity in my country, that the relationship between inequality and race, poverty and race, highly correlated. And that's been a long-standing issue in my country, coming from the Civil War and from the era of slavery. So we still carry that problem with us. Now, although we have this perspective that we have discovered inequality, my argument is the last point here. It doesn't do the cause of social equity very much good if all we do is explain how poor people are. And I go to meetings and hear my friends in economics, and they can tell you exactly how rich and how poor everybody is, but they don't have an idea about how to improve that. So the discovering inequality perspective is useful in terms of helping us understand that there is greater inequality, but it is not useful in any other sense. It doesn't give you a clue as to what to do. Okay, now another joke. There's a man sitting with his little baby on his knee, and it says, it goes in cycles, Junior. Sometimes the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Sometimes the rich get richer and the poor stay the same. Okay, and here's another joke, just no words, just silly. The guy with the cigarette is the 1%. Okay, now we come to serious scholarship. And this is a book that I recommend to you and I'm very enthusiastic about. This is a book that has taken the subject of equality by storm. It's read everywhere. It's powerfully important. I don't know whether it has been translated into Spanish. It has been. I'm not surprised. Then get the Spanish version and read it. I think you will be changed considerably in your thinking. The title of the book is a little confusing. Does anybody here know what a spirit level is? It may be a uniquely American or English idea. There is a tool which is used by builders, carpenters. And this tool is a long stick. And in the middle of this stick is a slender tube of glass. And inside that tube of glass is alcohol with a bubble. And you use that tool to find perfect level. And the name of that tool, in my language, is the spirit level, because spirit is in this tube, alcohol. So they titled their book, The Spirit Level, trying to find what is level. And the work is strictly and entirely empirical. It's not primarily a normative argument. Their findings are astonishing. The first, you see the second point there, economic growth in rich countries has largely done its work. That is a very controversial normative argument. So if you were in Thailand, or you were in Indonesia, or you were in Mexico, and you are dedicating your time and resources to the subject of economic growth. We need to grow the economy to get more jobs. This is the typical approach to economic growth. These two people, Wilkinson and Pickett, make the claim that for many economies, economic growth has done its job. That once you achieve a certain level of economic growth, the problem then is not the difference between your economy and the economy of another country, but the difference between the people in your economy, how well they are doing. What is the equality within your country? That matters more to the well-being of the people of your country than how well your country is doing compared to the neighboring country. That's the claim. Now the evidence, if you look at the bottom one, this is what they're finding is health and social problems are worse in more unequal countries or states. So you can have a very rich country and the general health of the people can be worse than in a poorer country if the people in the rich country are unequal to each other. And think about that for a minute. That's, we say in English, counterintuitive. But their evidence is clear, no question about it. That life expectancy in a country that has high inequality is lower than in a country with low inequality. Math and literacy skills, schools, and how well children are learning their math and their language. Infant mortality, homicides, imprisonment, the percentage of the population who are in prison, teenage birth, trust between people, the problem of obesity, big problem in my country. I'm evidence of that problem. Mental illness, I may also be evidence of that problem. Alcoholism. Drug abuse, social mobility. What Wilkinson and Pickett did was they compared the top 30 countries in the world, and they also compared the 50 American states. The reason they chose the 50 American states is because we have so much data, and our data go back for such a long time, and our data are excellent. So my state, Kansas, is about in the middle in terms of equality. Some states are very high in equality. Minnesota, Wisconsin, North Dakota, Washington, Oregon. Some states are very unequal in my country. Alabama, Mississippi, not Florida. Texas, very bad. Georgia, very bad. Yeah. So the point that Wilson and Pickett make about differences between countries, they find the exact same evidence in the United States with respect to differences between the states. So we say now to the governor of Alabama, stop worrying so much about growing your economy and taking jobs away from Mississippi, and worry more about more equal distribution of wealth within your country. That you're likely to have more effective, you're likely to do better with respect to life expectancy, to obesity, to teenage pregnancy, and so on, if you do that. Okay, that is Wilkinson and Pickett, the spirit level. There's another joke. This has to do with two people in jail, and the American, in the United States, it's very easy to end up in jail. this is a couple of them, it's making a joke about that. Not a very good one. Neither is this one. Okay, the next book I recommend to you is, I recommend it particularly because the specialist who wrote this book is particularly interested in South America, Latin America, and Africa. He's less interested in Europe and in North America, and he's come up with a new concept. You all know what violence is. So if I were to take my fist and hit Ramirez, that would be violence. You feel that's the meaning of violence. Well, Rob Nixon has written a book called Slow Violence and the Environmentalism of the Poor. His concept of slow violence is that I can harm Ramirez very slowly, very subtly, in ways that Ramirez doesn't even understand, and be more harmful to him than if I had engaged in quick violence. If there's such a thing as slow violence. And his particular example is the obvious one that we all recognize, and that is the influence of pollution, the problems of our environment. But he is much more interested in problems beyond the environment, but he starts with the environment. What he would say is that deforestation, serious problem in Brazil. Is it a problem in Mexico? It is. It is in Canada, a serious problem in Canada. It is a problem in America, in the United States as well. Ocean acidifying, global warming, problems of radioactivity, that the violence inflicted on the people from these things is slow violence. That's his first point. His second point is that this violence is not distributed equally, that it tends to focus on the poor, people in poor countries, or those in rich countries who happen also to be poor, but they're better off countries. So it influences my country because my country is so unequal internally. And so if you have environmental degradation in Mexico, is it more harmful to the peasant, to the poor, than it is to say the name of that area that you see outside the window?
Santa Fe.
More than people in Santa Fe. Rob Nixon, who is a professor at the University of Wisconsin in the United States, he is a South African by birth. He refers to the special problem of what he calls shadow kingdoms. Can anybody guess what a shadow kingdom might be? Large corporations, global corporations, Exxon, British Petroleum would be illustrative. Chiquita Banana, United Fruit Company, other corporations that for 100 years, 150 years have been exploiting kinds of companies, and they have great political power. They tend to ignore the boundaries of political boundaries, what Nixon claims is that the kind of colonialism with which we were familiar in the 17th and 18th century has come to be a new kind of colonialism, and it is the colonialism of shadow kingdoms. And that certain countries are more colonies to oil companies than they ever were colonies to Spain or to Portugal. Or to England. I shouldn't leave out England. My country. We had our revolution against England. What Nixon comes up with in his conclusion warms my heart, because it has to do with the subject of social equity and my particular current research on social equity. And my current research on social equity is called intergenerational social equity, or sustainable social equity. The idea being that the previous generation, my mother and father, and my grandmother and grandfather, left for me a certain quality of life. The question then becomes, what quality of life am I leaving for my children and my grandchildren? Now, what does that have to do with social equity? The theory, many philosophers have been wrestling with this for a long time. And people like John Rawls, Amartya Sen, Francis Fukuyama, other theorists of that sort, are all arguing now the importance of intergenerational fairness. That we not only have to worry about being equal among ourselves, we will use the word temporal, contemporary, among our temporal selves. If we do a better job of being equal between and among ourselves, and that improves and makes us all better, we have to worry also about trying to find ways to leave the world when we're finished with it to those who come after us, for there to be sustainable forms of fairness and justice. Rob Nixon, in his book Slow Violence, works on that problem and does a brilliant job of working on it. So I recommend that book to you. Whether it's in Spanish, I don't know. But I do know that Rob Nixon is a brilliant lecturer. And if ever you have an opportunity to find him in Mexico City, I would encourage you to bring him here to lecture. He's excellent. The third, I think I may skip one. But then again, I may not. Now, let's say the fourth one is the so-called street level perspective. There's a perspective in public administration that for about the last 20 years we've called street level bureaucracy. You're all familiar with Lipsky. I kept thinking Nixon. Lipsky. Lipsky wrote a very important book about street level bureaucracy. And if you read that book carefully, although he doesn't use the word fairness, much of what street level bureaucrats do is to wrestle with particular problems of fairness. When we say street level bureaucrats, we talk about policemen, firemen, public works people, water, sewer, streets, gutters, sidewalks. Also teachers, big subject in Mexico right now. Teachers are street level bureaucrats. What Lipsky found was that this is extremely hard work, that there's always insufficient resources. You never have enough resources to do your job well. He uses the word scarcity. And he goes on and on to describe the work of street level bureaucrats. And he says that it is so difficult that workers often become alienated from their work. They give up, that they go through the motions. They do their work, but with less and less passion. They get worn out because they don't have the resources. They need to do their job as well as they would like. Anyway, Lipsky wrote his book in the 80s, early 80s, late 70s. Yeah, I think he's about my age, very young. I think we're about contemporary. Anyway, there has been a series of wonderful scholarly, we call them the children of Lipsky. The scholars who have come along doing that same kind of work in recent years. And there are two books I'm going to recommend to you. One is by Stephen Maynard Moody. Oh, yeah, thank you. Yeah, would you continue to? He does very good work. This is a book called Cops, Teachers, and Counselors. Counselor means social worker. Stories from the front lines of public service. The second book is a new book by Stephen Maynard Moody and Charles Epp, E-P-P, called Pulled Over, P-U-L-L-A-D, over. These two books are about social equity at the base level of government. So let's just use the example of teaching. So you're a teacher and you have 30 students and you don't have enough time in the day to prepare and you don't have enough time to deal with your problem students. So how do you allocate your time? You ration it. And are you impartial and give each student the same amount of time? Or do you in some other way allocate your time? If there's a certain student who has special problems, do you spend more time with that student to give them help? How do you make that decision? Well, you have the same problem with police and with all other forms of public work at the street level. And what we've discovered is that how public workers make those choices is very important. And what they found is that there's a certain logic of how you allocate scarce resources and how you ration those resources. And that logic is based on a phrase called client worthiness. That the bureaucrat, the public worker, the best they can do to try to allocate what time they have and what resources they have is to make some sort of instinctive judgment as to the worthiness of their client. So using teachers again, if one tries hard, has a hard time, but he tries very hard, and he works hard, you're inclined to think of one as worthy. If Pedro is lazy and having a good time and taking a nap, not so worthy. Or if I'm a cop and I see someone doing something in their car on the road, and we say pull over, I stop them. And I ask for their license and so on. And I see that that the car is neat and clean and they are courteous to me, and I am courteous to them, and I ask them a couple of questions. I think of them as worthy. On the other hand, if they are appear to be hiding something, or nervous, or in some other ways display behavior that is threatening to me as a policeman, I may think of them as unworthy. That this concept of worthiness comes into play. Now, we have a serious question of fairness. Is the public service being fair? What idea of fairness are they using? That they are making choices, little choices every day, every hour of every day. They're improvising in their work to do the best that they can with what they have and what they understand to be what would be effective for them. And the particular phrase that I took from cops, teachers, and counselors is the bottom one. That street level bureaucrats engage in small acts of normative improvisation by forgotten streetwise workers who sustain the state. Acts of statecraft on which the institutions of governing depend. That in the end, what government is all about is that part of government that literally touches you, your street, your safety in your house, your safety at your work, the quality of your air, the quality of your water, the availability of education for your children, your health care. That in all of that part of public life, we have continual, daily, routine problems of choice and fairness. So the issue of equity just pervades everything that happens in public life. So the idea of social equity now, so-called thick social equity, is thinking in terms of it as being pervasive. And these are very hard and difficult problems, and that people who are in public life, and particularly those at the street level, are engaged in the challenges of social equity. That's what public administration is all about. Well, let me finish up. You let me down. So there's been a reemergence of social equity in the field of public administration, and we will call it thick social equity. And it comes at an interesting time because in many nation states and in many states within the United States, inequality is